Hello and welcome to a Monday Night Football Showdown edition. Lamar Jackson versus Andy Dalton. My name is Adam Levitan. As always, joined by Cody Main. I wanted to bring this up because it is a Taysom Hill Showdown slate. Taysom Hill, of course, famously made his name on Showdown slates. Now I feel like he's on everybody's radar. But anyways, Cody, how's it going?
Yeah, we can't sneak by 5% Taysom Hill in Showdown anymore. It's going to be 20% plus on tonight's slate, and he's going to be priced like he should be. I always talk about it on these Ravens slates. I love the Lamar Jackson slates, and now with the injuries on both sides of the ball, I think it makes for an even more compelling slate.
I mean, Mark Andrews is such an alpha. I can't really describe like how much I think Mark Andrews means to this offense. Doesn't mean Lamar can't get it done, but it's going to be a lot harder, of course. For those of you who played preseason, you're well aware of Isaiah. Likely other news around this game is Jarvis Landry is expected back here tonight. And so Michael Thomas is, of course, done, but Jarvis Landry is back tonight. And we do have Devin Duvernay questionable as well. I was actually surprised when I saw the initial total come out for this game. I was like, 47.5, man. That is a lot for two teams which can go extremely run heavy. Now, Ravens have been all over the place in terms of run versus throw rate. New Orleans has leaned run heavy a lot this year. 47 struck me as a lot. I think it's down to 46.5 right now. Still feels a bit high to me, though, for this matchup. But maybe, I have a ton of respect for the NFL market. I'm sure I'm the donkey and I'm the one who's wrong. But anyways, what do you think about this game from a macro perspective?
Yeah, that was my biggest takeaway as well. We know that regardless of game script, regardless of matchup, this Saints team wants to be run heavy. They want to hide Andy Dalton as much as they possibly can. And I once again would expect them to do so, even against a Baltimore defense that really hasn't been able to stop the run or the pass to this point of the season. But on the Baltimore side, the injuries that you kind of mentioned off the top, with Rashad Bateman out, with Mark Andrews out, it makes you wonder, will they lean more run heavy? And they haven't really done so yet this season. You mentioned they've kind of been all over the place. In that week 6 or week 7 matchup, I believe, against the Browns, they were like really, really run heavy in that matchup, but otherwise have been relatively neutral or slightly pass first. So, I'm curious. It's going to be one thing that we have to think through leading up to lock, but like, is the injuries on the Baltimore side going to dictate how they want to operate tonight?
Sorry, I misspoke. I get all these dust balls confused. Demarcus Robinson is questionable for tonight, not Devin Duvernay. Devin Duvernay is fine. Demarcus Robinson was added to the injury report Friday with a groin issue and then did not practice Saturday, listed questionable. Also, Gus Edwards, not expected to play in this game. We'll get to Kenyon Drake here in a second. Yeah, I mean, it's hard, I think, when you don't have Bateman and you don't have Andrews, but Lamar is just such a freak, such a superstar. What do you think about the roster construction stuff here for tonight? We only have very few people on the onslaughts on the 1-5 and the 5-1. What do you think about this stuff tonight?
Yeah, I think the way that the salary set up tonight makes for a ton of 3-3 and a ton of 4-2, just given the value that we'll get into from the pass catching perspective on the Baltimore side. I don't think you're going to see a ton of these Saints heavy style lineups, and certainly no onslaughts, because everyone's going to want to fit in, one of Alvin Kamara or Olave. We'll see Andy Dalton, I think, come through with a little bit more ownership. So if you are someone that wants to play into these onslaught narratives, and if I were to do so, I think I would be more in on the 5 Ravens, 1 Saints side of things. You're gonna get paid off with really low ownership tonight. I don't expect those numbers to creep up too much as we get close to lock.
One macro thing that I would say is I think some people still have it in their head that the Ravens have this elite defense, because it wasn't that long ago you couldn't do anything against the Ravens. Like, they were a really good defense, maybe, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years. I feel like that people are clinging to their priors on that. I mean, this defense has been bad for a while, including this year. Let's get to the quarterback position. These Lamar slates are always interesting because he's so owned. I mean, we have 91%. It's really hard to make lineups without Lamar Jackson in Showdown tonight. Would you be making any without Lamar? And what do you think about Lamar at 34.5 projected ownership? I'm sorry, 27.7 captain projected ownership.
We had a similar situation with Patrick Mahomes last night. We've had similar situations with Lamar himself, with Josh Allen, with Jalen Hurts. And I think for me, the way that I'm building and in the tournaments that I'm playing in, certainly a cash game lock. And I think we've got the salary saving pieces to make things work from a captain perspective in cash, I don't think you need to necessarily deviate away from that plan. In tournaments, for sure, I have we'll have Lamar in every lineup. That's just the way that I'm planning on playing. I don't want to play for the 10% outcomes where he's not in the optimal lineup. I just think it's so likely, and I'll find the 5 other spots on my roster to get different. The point where it gets interesting to me is at the captain perspective. And I talked about it a little bit with Mahomes last night, is when these teams have so many pass catchers that are, actually rosterable at various price tags. And we have that tonight with Andrews and with Bateman out. It makes it really easy to get unique because you have all of these guys coming through with 10, 15, 20% total ownership, and you can pair a couple of them together and get really unique combos. So normally I would say, yeah, there's a case to be made to, and there's always a case at 27.7% ownership at captain to make a case for the fade. But like for me tonight, I just think I'm much more likely with Bateman out, with Andrews out, to find unique combinations to pair with Lamar. But I just want to play into the 27.7% ownership, hope that there isn't too much of a drop off with the weaponry that he's got around him, and just kind of play into that, Lamar being an alpha type lineup.
Yeah, I mean, on the other side, the Andy Dalton stuff, we've seen quote unquote bad quarterbacks be part of the optimal. I feel like repeatedly this year. I mean, the Jacoby Brissett one is the one that sticks out. That was, I believe, it was a Monday night game. It was Brissett against Burrow, and Brissett was not very owned at all, and he played a really good game. Had like 278 yards and a touchdown. I could see similarly on Andy Dalton. I think they want to run, but Andy Dalton can certainly be effective. And obviously, he has Chris Olave, he has Kamara, he has Jarvis Landry coming back, etc. So 42% total ownership and 4.8% captain on Andy seems a little light to me, but I get it because he's very expensive for quote unquote. I don't want to click Andy Dalton. What do you think about him?
Yeah, and the thing with Andy Dalton is we just saw it on, I think, a week 6 slate or week 7 slate with him against the Cardinals. He was 17.5% owned in total and less than 2% owned at captain. It's been relatively absurd on the extremes for both quarterbacks at the high end with the Jalen Hurts and Josh Allens of the world, and then on the opposite end of the spectrum with Andy Dalton and Jacoby Brissett, likely too low owned for the type of floor and ceiling that they provide. And I go back to it every time that we talk about these quarterbacks that we think are quote unquote bad, but the floor that they provide, the ceiling that they provide in a positionless format. I mean, if we could just roster 6 quarterbacks, we would certainly choose to do so, given how, they touch the ball on every play. It just seems absurd that we're getting to this point in Showdown now where it's kind of become the hipster thing to do, to fade the quarterbacks. And I think they're more likely to be optimal than not. And I think we could see this Dalton ownership get squeezed out again here a little bit as maybe Lamar comes up to 92, 93%. And then a guy that we'll get to next in Alvin Kamara come up from, 75 to 80%, closer to 90% himself. And if that happens, it's not going to leave the salary left to get to Dalton. So for me, the way that I'm handling the situation, I think he's okay in cash games. I don't think he's necessarily a necessity still at this point, but certainly in GPP lineups where I'm prioritizing the Saints pass catchers, I want to be overexposed to Dalton in the flex for sure.
I mean, there were some sub 10K quarterback spots, which I think is different than 10-2, but still. While we're here, you mentioned positionless. Taysom Hill is, of course, positionless. It's hard for us to get a good mean projection on Taysom Hill because you're betting on incredible efficiency, unlimited snaps, and limited touches, right? Like, can Taysom Hill go berserk on 8 touches tonight? Absolutely. We've seen him do it repeatedly. Is that the likeliest outcome? No. So 6,400 and an 8.2 base projection at, 18%, 2% captain. I feel like it's a spot that I don't really want to click, and we're going to get some other guys at running back and wide receiver that I think are better. But like going into these showdown slates, I'm just like prepared for Taysom to slam it down my throat if I don't play him. What do you think about Taysom tonight?
Yeah, it's generally not how I like to play because we know Taysom's opportunities are going to be limited. We can make the case. Mark Ingram is out. There's a more likely outcome here where Taysom Hill is just like the RB2 in this offense, but it's just generally not how I like to play. We can kind of expect him to be out there for 30-ish% of the snaps, get his package of the offense, and that's going to be it. And if he happens to score 2 touchdowns in his limited time on the field, then that's probably going to be what is going to bury us. I will say that if you're using an optimizer to build, if you're using the solver or fantasy labs and you're optimizing by ceiling, be careful about your Taysom Hill exposure. He's got a 21.5% projected ceiling for us. And that is just like what Adam pointed to. It's really tough to get a good mean median projection on him because of those insane outcomes at like the 80th percentile range for him. So for me, not really going to be in at roughly 20% projected ownership. I'll hope he doesn't bury me there.
Yeah, and by the way, this ceiling stuff that we're doing on Taysom Hill is like manual. Like Leone had to go in there and like rework the model to like adjust for Taysom Hill. Like no other player in the league is going to have an 8.2 base and 21.5 ceiling. Like, he's Taysom is like literally breaking stuff for the virgins behind the scenes in the spreadsheet. So just be aware of that. All right. Running back. The story is Kamara's pass game role to me. I mean, when Andy Dalton has been out there, the checkdowns are just like so often, and Kamara's been so explosive. He hasn't been that great as a runner, I don't think, but he has been incredible as a pass catcher. Obviously on DraftKings full PPR, that is great. And obviously he has plenty of touchdown equity as well. So we have 80% total here. 11.4 certainly expensive on Alvin Kamara, but people are going to fit it. It's hard, I think, to fit Lamar and Kamara together. How owned do you think that combo is going to be? And what do you think about Kamara, any other Saints stuff?
Yeah, that's where I think the combos get interesting, because we'll get to some of these guys on the Ravens side, which weren't exactly priced for Andrews and Bateman being out, and the potential that, Demarcus Robinson could even miss this game. So we'll get some options that I think will allow this to fit. The way to get different is to like play those two together and not play them with those cheap dust balls, and kind of find a way to make the roster construction work that way. You mentioned the pass game usage for Alvin Kamara, and that's really what has me most excited over the last 4 weeks. A 25.8% target share, team high red zone target share. Dalton's going to stay under center, and even with Landry projected back, even with Olave getting those deep downfield targets, Kamara is his go-to guy. I kind of like the idea of boosting Dalton's projection in Kamara lineups. That might get you off of some of that Lamar stuff that is going to be more popular, might get you onto some combinations where maybe we just expect Dalton's ceiling to funnel through Alvin Kamara. And if that's the case, I think that's one way to build more unique roster constructions. I think it's almost like a secondary story that Mark Ingram is out for this game, because we're not necessarily even playing Kamara for his rushing upside at this point. Right. It's all about the pass game usage.
Yeah, I think one thing you mentioned about the Mark Ingram injury, like they added Jordan Howard. I could see Jordan Howard and Dwayne Washington getting a little bit, but I think in the high leverage situations, i.e. around the goal line, if they want to go with other rushers besides Kamara, I think it will be Taysom. Yeah. So what do you think about Dwayne Washington and Jordan Howard at 200? I mean, I kind of need to play someone really cheap on this slate. I don't think it'll be Jordan Howard or Dwayne Washington for me, but they could score. I mean, it's at least in the range for them to score, I guess. I don't know. I don't think I can do it, but what do you think about Washington or Howard?
Yeah, it's going to be really tough to stomach in any sort of single entry, 3-max style stuff. We'll talk about some of the other 200 priced guys that are stone minimum on DraftKings that I think are a little bit easier to stomach. And, for that reason, it's going to make it more unique. So if you're a large field MME player, I don't think there's anything wrong with Dwayne Washington or Jordan Howard as a sprinkle in like an MME set. Even in 20 max, I think it's probably okay. Certainly a max one rule for Dwayne Washington and Jordan Howard, though.
Okay. On the other side, I thought Kenyon Drake played a great game last week, man. Like, I mean, I know the Ravens went out of their way to like try to find a zillion other backs and play Dobbins and play Gus Edwards and bring in all these other guys, bring in Mike Davis, whatever. I thought Kenyon Drake played a really good game. I always thought Kenyon Drake could play, especially on pass downs. 7,200 seems relatively fair for him. It comes down to how much you think Justice Hill is going to play. Obviously, we have Justice Hill mixing in plenty, and on a point per dollar basis, we do have Justice Hill as the better play. But I was kind of impressed by Kenyon Drake. 29% total ownership intrigues me there for sure. What do you think about the Ravens backfield?
I do like Drake as like leverage off of what I expect to be more popular Ravens passing attack. Obviously, he's going to be leverage kind of off of the generic build of stars and scrubs. The 7K price tag is one of those price tags that's tough to fit alongside Lamar Jackson, alongside Alvin Kamara. So I do expect Kenyon Drake to come in a little bit lower owned than maybe the industry would expect him to. And, with Gus Edwards assumed out, he didn't play all that much last week, 21% of the team snaps. But when he was in there, they were feeding him the rock, 35% of the team's rushing attempts on just a 21% snap rate. So with him now sidelined, we can maybe reasonably expect Kenyon Drake's rushing attempts rate to get up closer to 35, 40, 45% maybe. And we kind of assume that he's got that pass catching role still locked up. He ran around on 58% of dropbacks last week, is going to be out there in the high leverage, long down and distance in 2-minute situations. So Yeah, I think it's arrow pointing up for Kenyon Drake from a large field tournament perspective. Hopefully that ownership sticks 25, 30%. I think I'm pretty comfortable with that.
Yeah.
And as leverage, direct leverage off of like Lamar Jackson and the Ravens pass catchers, if he just happens to be the one that falls into the end zone, you're going to get paid off with really nice captain ownership too.
Yeah. I mean, my hesitancy is that Lamar does not have a very high throw rate at running backs. And I think that's like partially who he's played with, but I think it's also like a long history of rushing quarterbacks don't throw to the running back position a lot. Let's go to wide receiver. There's a lot of people interested in Deshaun Jackson. Are people aware that Deshaun Jackson is 36 years old? 36. I mean, I played in a like a rec basketball league last year. You know, I was 39. I had 4 to 5 former Division 1 players on my team. I was like, I'll bet anything. I'll bet anything. 100 that. Well, whatever you guys want that we're going to win the league. We didn't even make the playoffs. These kids were just out of college and they were just running circles around us. Deshaun Jackson, and I'm not comparing myself to a professional athlete. Still, Deshaun Jackson is 36 years old now. They need him, man. I mean, Demarcus Robinson is banged up. Rashad Bateman is out. Mark Andrews is out. So I get it at $200 for sure. What do you think about the Deshaun Jackson play? And then we need to get into the rest of the Ravens wide receivers because there's a lot of guys here that like people don't even know who they are.
Yeah, I mean, people just straight up asking if he's going to play. It sounds like he's going to see the field tonight. And
yeah, I think he's going to play for sure. Yeah,
I was looking for more information, looking for beat reports and articles, whatever I could find. And the most telling thing about his age was a Lamar Jackson quote that said he looks like the same Deshaun Jackson that I saw growing up. I was like, Jesus Christ, how old am I? So yeah, Lamar Jackson's going to be playing with the guy that he watched growing up tonight, and 36-year-old Deshaun Jackson. The reason why I don't know that he's necessarily a bad play, despite, breaking the age model, is because I don't think he's going to be owned, because I don't necessarily think we need to play too much into this range because of the guys that are priced just a little bit above him. I think for base 2 wide receiver sets, it is going to be Devin Duvernay and Demarcus Robinson if both of those guys suit up. Right now, that's what we're projecting. But I do think James Proche is going to mix in a lot. He was used a lot last week when Rashad Bateman went down early. You saw a lot of routes for James Proche, and he's another preseason guy that had shown an ability at the preseason level to earn targets. I don't know if it necessarily translates here, but like the target competition is not going to be fierce. It's going to be guys like Devin Duvernay and Demarcus Robinson. I think at 3,800, I think James Proche is a pretty interesting play at 15% ownership.
I certainly like Proche better than Duvernay. We just bet an under in Duvernay's props. I mean, Duvernay is not a target earner. I think they'll get him like maybe 1 or 2 jet sweeps and they may scheme a little bit of stuff to him. I'm just not sure he's good enough to do it. And at 6,800, I mean, I'd rather take a shot on Proche, I think, at 3,800. On the other side is much more exciting. People are going to be very excited about Chris Olave, and I think deservedly so. I mean, last week, I think if you looked at the game from last week, Alvin Kamara was just scoring and moving the ball so efficiently. There wasn't really a lot of room for Chris Olave to go nuts. It was just like Kamara, and not enough room. On this game, I think there's a lot more room for Olave. I mean, he sticks out as an awesome play. I think at 8,600, if this was a main slate and say he was 6K, like I'd probably be playing Chris Olave in cash on main slate here. And when you get stuff like that, you get him very, very owned. In Showdown, I guess one thing that could keep Olave's ownership in check is that I don't think you can play Kamara, Lamar, and Olave all together. Like that's going to be really, really hard to make a team with. That said, Olave saves you a bunch of money. So if you don't play Kamara, Olave, I think, is going to be on a lot of teams. In other words, like max 1 of Kamara Olave won't be a rule, but it'll just happen, I think, kind of naturally for people in lineups. What do you think about the Saints wide receiver stuff?
Yeah, Olave is going to be owned, but I kind of like him as a leverage play in the captain position off of Lamar and off of Alvin Kamara. Those two are going to soak up, 50% plus captain ownership, probably 60, 65% in some of the smaller field stuff that I'll be playing. And, Olave has kind of cemented himself as an alpha wide receiver 1 already after, week 1 where he was barely targeted, up to a 26.3% target share, 41.0% air yard share, just a massive air yard share as the guy who is getting all of those downfield targets. Is certainly like an archetype that I want to target in Showdown, especially when it's going to come with, relatively low captain ownership. So A guy that I consistently like to be in on. I'm going to have plenty of exposure to Olave, and I think the way that I'm going to do that in terms of trying to get over the field is certainly at the captain position.
We don't have Jarvis Landry projected in right now. I misspoke there. I think we're still waiting for word, but I do kind of think that Jarvis Landry has a reasonable chance to come back and play tonight. I don't think that I'd be overly interested in his role at 5,200 in his first game back, but he'd certainly look good at a point per dollar perspective because a lot of these guys would come down and Jarvis Landry would indeed come up. Have you heard anything on Landry status?
Yeah, he was limited all week, and I'm kind of with you. I think that maybe after the show we'll lean towards putting him in for now until maybe we'll get official word here soon this afternoon. I think for me, depending on where we kind of land in terms of his projected target share and his overall role in his first game back, the way that I'll be handling it is just a max one rule of Landry, Traquan Smith, and Rashid Shaheed, who's not really playable at this price tag anyway. But if we start to get to a point where we can expect Jarvis Landry to return to a 100% role, then you're right. At 5,200, he becomes pretty interesting.
People might be asking themselves, is that the Kevin White that was like a top 5 pick maybe like 6 or 7 years ago? Yes, that is the same Kevin White. He made a big play. What was that? 1 or 2 weeks ago, he made like one big play. He's 200 though, but I think I prefer Deshaun Jackson to Kevin White in this 200 spot. If you're punting, would you agree there?
Yeah, I do agree. If for some reason Jarvis Landry does remain out as our projections hold, then I think he should make your large field tournament player pool, but a very light sprinkle at most.
Yeah. Okay. All right. The talk, I mean, the talk of team preseason. I mean, I should think I could see us being light on projection on Isaiah Likely. I mean, this dude has done nothing but earn targets and be productive on those targets since August. I mean, every time he gets in there, every time he's running routes, his targets per route run is insane. His yards per route run is insane. I mean, he's just been so productive. Going back to Coastal Carolina, he was like totally dominant. And of course, when you play for Coastal Carolina, you expect guys who are going to be in the NFL to be totally dominant. But still, I think we could even be light Likely's projection here if you consider him. I know you had the tweet, used to joke about 90% CMC. If he's even 80% Mark Andrews, we're certainly light on projection here. So I am very interested in Isaiah Likely. I think we could be light both projection and ownership projection, but maybe I'm in my team preseason bubble. Where you at on the Isaiah Likely stuff? And then also I think Josh Oliver is in play too.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm definitely in the team preseason bubble, and the 90% Mark Andrews thing is obviously a stolen bit from you with the 90% CMC on Mike Davis. But it's not that I think Isaiah Likely is as good a pass catcher as Mark Andrews. It just simply comes down to the role in the options that are going to be around him. We talk about his preseason targets per route run rate, which was 41.4%. The target competition that he'll be facing tonight, and yes, the defenses are much better. The defenses are going to be schemed to try and prevent Isaiah Likely from doing Isaiah Likely things, but he's going to be basically out there with a team of preseason wide receivers and pass catchers in a role that this team and Lamar Jackson likes to heavily utilize. We saw it when Mark Andrews went down early last week. I think we see it again here tonight. I wouldn't necessarily project a 25% plus target share for him or anything like that, but I do think that he is the likely leader in targets when it's all said and done tonight. And at the price tag, I think he makes sense for cash. He makes sense for GPPs. He makes sense at captain. I'm kind of all in on the likely hype train tonight, I guess.
I think sometimes when backups come in, people assume they're going to have the same role as the starter. In other words, like Brock Wright's going to run the TJ Hawkinson routes. That's not what happens normally because these guys aren't as good. Isaiah Likely already is running the kind of routes that Mark Andrews was running. Like Isaiah Likely's not some blocker who turns around and catches a 3-yard stop route. Isaiah Likely's ADOT is like over 10 yards already, and so that seam stretching roll, that deep roll, I think is what a Likely's going to play tonight. So obviously I am very excited. New Orleans side, it's made a difference when Troutman has been in or out for Juwan Johnson. That's one of those like sneaky injuries that people aren't looking at that I think is important. Adam Troutman, we are projecting to be active tonight. Juwan Johnson, I think, will probably be more popular as we have it here, but I'd probably not want to play either of these guys at their price tags, but gun to my head, I think it'll be Troutman over Juwan, price adjusted for me. Any interest for you in Juwan, Troutman, any of these guys?
Yeah, I think Juwan's route participation certainly comes down when Troutman is active, and I think that's should be an expectation. If Jarvis Landry is back, we start to get a relatively healthy Saints offense. It's likely that Juwan Johnson's target rate, which is already not great, is going to come down even more. If he's going to come through with any amount of ownership, I would rather just find the money to get off of it.
Quick question here from Brandon. We're going back to quarterback. He says, any concern Dalton gets pulled for Winston? I'm not sure why you would think that. I mean, Dalton played a really good game against the Raiders last week. I think they think that he can run the offense better. I thought Dalton's actually played at like a reasonable level this year. Like considering the state of the quarterback position in the NFL, you can make a case Dalton's been like, I don't know, a top 20 quarterback this year, which, isn't that bad. And I think he's been better than Jameis, but I know the Showdown Bros always want to play the backup quarterback and like somehow get glory when he gets benched. And I don't know. How likely do you think that is?
Yeah, I think it's really unlikely in terms of what it would do to Dalton. Like if he's so bad that he's getting pulled, you're losing anyway. So I'm not really factoring that into my calculus and whether I'm playing Dalton or not. And then it would have to be so bad so early for Winston to come in and then be in the optimal lineup as well that I'm not playing Winston. So yeah, I mean it's possible, I suppose, but it's just not really playing into my calculus tonight on who I'm playing at quarterback.
Okay. Defense and kicker, as always, an interesting conversation around ownership. Justin Tucker, I get the kickers don't matter. Justin Tucker might actually matter. Dude is absolutely ridiculous. Will be in the dome tonight. I mean, he could certainly bang some 60 yarders. What do you think about playing defense and kickers tonight?
Yeah, I mean, I talk about this on some of these slates with the Harrison Buckers, the Robbie Golds, these guys of the world. Justin Tucker is certainly at the top of that list. The field recognizes names when it comes to kickers, or at least it looks like that in terms of ownership. We just saw a Ravens Showdown slate where Justin Tucker was 46.9% owned. And I gave some credit last night to DraftKings for pricing up Harrison Butker. It was the first time they had priced a kicker at 5K or above last night, and then immediately come back down for the greatest kicker of all time, where we kind of need the salary relief, is now 4,200. So I do think Justin Tucker is basically a cash game lock and should be a staple of GPP lineups given the players that he's priced around. But just know that when you're playing Justin Tucker, you're probably playing into more ownership than even we're projecting here.
Yeah, and you see a big price discrepancy between Ravens and Saints defense. Obviously, Lamar has this capability on sacks that Andy Dalton does not have. I think it's a bit contrarian to go Saints defense here. Any thoughts on the Saints?
Yeah, I do like the contrarian defense take. We kind of saw that come to fruition last night when the Chiefs got forced to play from behind, and you see all those dropbacks there from Patrick Mahomes. And yeah, he can scramble, and he was really good at making plays with his legs, but also ended up taking some sacks. You can see those situations play out, and especially when defenses are cheap like the Saints are, it doesn't take a whole lot for them to pay off. I think the fact that Lamar is going to be so owned, the field still doesn't like to play their quarterback against the opposing DST, which I think is totally fine at this point in Showdown. I think we could see that 12.4% ownership coming down a little bit even.
Yeah, I just like to compare the kicker and defense stuff to other players in the range. In other words, who do we need to beat in this range? And obviously, there's not like a ton here. You would need to beat guys like Proche and Justice Hill and Traquan and Marquez and maybe Landry too. So it's not like there's anybody completely jumping off the page here that we can't beat with the kicker. And that's why you see some of the ownership here coming up on the kicker stuff. Okay. Let's go ahead and get to questions. We'll do 2 or 3 minutes of questions here before we get to the planting of the flags. Andrew says, have you considered putting an age model in ETR? I find myself Googling players' ages, plus you have bit equity. Yes, single input models, PSM and age model. Those are my kind of models. I think you can build that yourself, though. We don't need to waste the Virgin's time with that. Anything to be able to fade Callaway. He always disappoints. Yeah, just not that good at football. Just not that good. Yeah, Matt says you can play Olave, Kamara, and Lamar if you punt with Deshaun Jackson. I think that probably will be what a lot of people will do, especially in like optimals. Cody, I don't know if you've looked at any optimals yet, but I feel like getting Olave, Kamara, and Lamar is going to be the goal of a lot of people who are just playing cash or just like kind of clicking.
Yeah, yeah, and I talk about this a little bit with when we see kickers at captain, and you hear the reaction that, well, it was my captain was only 2% owned. Why is my team so duplicated? It's because it funnels to such a one-way roster construction that you end up playing kind of the same style of lineup that everyone else is playing, maybe a 1v1 or at most a 2v2 off of everyone. So I think if you're playing Lamar, you're playing Olave, you're playing Kamara, and then you have Djax in there, you might have a sub 10% on Djax, but everyone else has that same style of roster construction. So I would just be very careful about doing that.
D. Corey says, has there been any news that Deshaun Jackson would definitely play more than Tylan Wallace? I have not seen anything like that. It's hard to get out of these coaches exactly how much this guy's going to play. Deshaun Jackson is such a popular player. I could see some like rap sheet report in a couple hours, like Deshaun Jackson's going to play, roughly 10 or 20 snaps or something like that. Like I could see that. I haven't seen anything yet, though. What do you think about Tylan Wallace versus Deshaun Jackson?
Yeah, I think this is one of those points where you can kind of embrace some of the input volatility. We have it one way because that's kind of how we think it will break, but I certainly would not be shocked if Tylan Wallace ran more routes or got more targets than Deshaun Jackson. So, if you want to just flip that 1v1 in some smaller field stuff, then I think you'll get a nice ownership discount there.
Yep. Michael says shocked 4-2 Ravens is more common than 4-2 Saints. An explanation there? You think why 4-2 Ravens is going to be so much more popular?
Yeah, a lot of it just comes down to salary. You'll see that you're able to fit in Lamar with the pass catchers, and then you also have Justin Tucker, who's going to come through a lot in a lot of those lineups as well. So that's generally the reason why when you have all of those skill position players like the Saints do, priced between that 4-ish and 6K range, it's tough to fit multiple of them in there in lineups that have Lamar and Kamara and those type of guys. So I think you end up seeing a lot of Kamara, Olave, Kamara, Dalton lineups with 4 Ravens on the other side.
From Betanator, any chance Mike Davis comes in at the goal line? I believe Mike Davis only played like 5 snaps last week. Obviously, Gus played most of that game last week. We have a very light projection on Mike Davis, expecting Drake and Justice Hill to be ahead. But do you have any interest in Mike Davis at 1,600? That's one that's like not going to be owned like literally whatsoever.
Yeah, and it's a nice way, like if you don't want to completely punt it off, it's a nice way to get a little bit different while still getting that salary relief in $1,600, but you're not playing into those lineups that are completely punting it down to $200. I have a tough time seeing it, but it is one of those price tags that even if he handles 10 to 15% of the team's rushing attempts, which might be a shade hot anyway, and happens to fall in the end zone, it's enough to pay off if the other guys fail.
You're going to take a zero a huge amount of the time, I think, here on Mike Davis. So just be aware of that. Double kicker in cash. I haven't tried to make any teams yet. I don't know if you have, Cody, but both kickers in cash?
Yeah, I think so. We had a similar situation last night where like our optimal was projecting Marquez Valdez-Scantling at 5,400 and you had Butker at 5K. I just think almost every time when you don't have to embrace that volatility of somebody like that, and in this game, it would be someone in that 4 to 5K range who are all of those skill position players are extremely volatile. I would just try and load up on the kickers wherever possible.
Yeah, this comment from Isaac, Deshaun Jackson captain, which you could take a zero at, but it does allow you to fit Olave, Kamara, Lamar, Dalton. I haven't done as much math on this as probably Cody and other people have, but I think when you threaten to take a zero at captain, you are really starting to draw thin. I really don't like to do that. So what do you think about Deshaun Jackson captain in order to fit in everybody else?
Yeah, this is something that I think the field is still doing too much, and I'll happily allow them to as long as they want to, because I think it is suboptimal. I think the only time that it makes sense to punt it off at captain in order to fit in the flex options that we want is when that punt captain at least can come close. I know the salary matters, but they still need to come close to a ceiling that matches all of the other players on the slate. That like Djax doesn't. I don't think Djax doesn't have that within his range of outcomes where like he's going to beat or come close to Olave, Kamara, those guys. Because if that's the case, you're probably just going to want Djax in the flex and one of those other guys at captain. The other reason why I don't think it's optimal is because, like you can see there from Isaac, it's just going to funnel you into the same roster construction as everyone else. And yeah, you've got your 1% owned or whatever Djax captain, but 1% of 150 or 180,000 whatever entries in tonight's large field tournament is still a lot of lineups, and you're still going to be heavily duplicated. So Djax captain is not something I'll be doing tonight.
Yeah, and I think people are asking about Djax in cash too. Like is the Djax construction for cash, not captain, but maybe DJ. I just think DJX has a lot of zeros, man. I mean, he has a lot of zeros. Rashad Bateman has like tons of like 5-point games in his range. You think Deshaun Jackson has like, he has a ton of zeros here. Even if he plays 10 or 20 snaps, Deshaun Jackson has a ton of zeros still. So
yeah, I still think in cash and showdown, like zero avoidance is a big thing. And those punt 200 guys from a baseline, from a mean perspective, are going to probably give you better lineups. You have to understand that, like they're, like Adam said, the range of zeros is just, it's a massive amount of the time they're going to give you 0 or 1 or 2.
All right, last one tonight, Kamara and Drake together in the same lineup. I have no problem with that whatsoever, especially in showdown. But even in main slate, like 2 running backs who can catch the football with each other, I think is totally fine. So I assume you're okay with this one, Cody.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense.
All right, let's get to the favorite portion of the program, the flag plants. I'm going to go first so Cody doesn't steal my guy. It's ridiculous already. It's enough. I always let Cody and Gary go first. They steal my guy. I end up with dust. I, of course, going to team preseason. If this is 41% on Isaiah Likely, I mean, I might actually have to fire up the solver and go 150 Isaiah Likely lineups, because I don't think his role is going to be that different from Mark Andrews. Clearly, he's a worse player. Clearly. But I don't think his role is going to be that different. The way you beat New Orleans, in my opinion, is with a very throw-heavy game plan, especially when you don't have J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. So I really like Isaiah Likely here. I think he's underpriced, under-owned, and frankly, I might have to talk to our virgins, because I think we might be underprojected also. And so we get the hat trick there. Isaiah Likely in the optimal flag plan. Cody, go ahead.
I love it. Let's keep the projection low as a means to keep the ownership projection in check as well. So let's not talk to those virgins quite yet. I'm going to go to the other side of the ball. Chris Olave. I love this player archetype in showdown. A guy that has plenty of poor games within his range of outcomes because he is being targeted more downfield. If he just happens to not convert on those targets, there are going to be some suboptimal performances within his range of outcomes, but a 41% target share, a 15.2 yard ADOT. I still think this Ravens secondary is going to have issues limiting deep passes. I still think that they're going to try and sell out a little bit to stop Alvin Kamara. Potentially the return of Jarvis Landry will do more to take defensive attention away from him than it will do to limit his target opportunities. I think we're probably a touch hot at 11% captain ownership, as it's likely Kamara and Lamar Jackson come up a little bit. So give me Chris Olave, optimal captain tonight.
Chris Olave, love it. I mean, Chris Olave yards per route run for a rookie with his quarterback play this year is just insane. I mean, dude is just absolutely balling. That is going to do it for a showdown breakdown Monday Night Football edition. Good luck out there tonight. Get out there, win something big. By the way, if you have not yet signed up for Established Run, we have reduced the price of the full season package, and we have monthly and weekly available now. Be sure to check that out. Also, NBA props, NBA DFS packages are available now as well. 15 game slate tonight. Absolutely outrageous. For Cody, for producer Adam, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.